Okay, welcome back. We are going to have a look at financial literacy. In our other book, it was chapter 7, so you can ignore the chapter thing, but this is what we're going to use to cover off the financial math for pre-calculus 11. We're going to look at a couple of formulas, simple and compound interest. We're going to look at some formulas to calculate annuities. We will hopefully get some time to look at the difference between renting and leasing a vehicle, or renting or purchasing a home. We'll see where we get to. So first off, with 7.1 here, simple interest, there are two basic formulas for calculating interest. The first is simple interest and the second is compound interest. Most banks or most investment places or whatever will use compound interest. It is just a fancier form of simple interest. You can manipulate the simple interest formula multiple times to get compound interest. But before we get into compound interest and everything else, we're going to have a look at calculating some simple interest. So here we go. Simple interest, the formula is I is equal to PRT, I being the interest that you earn in dollars, P being the principal, the amount of money that you start with, invested and or borrowed in dollars. R is the annual interest rate, the interest rate per year. And this has to be as a decimal. And hopefully you remember that in order to convert a percentage to a decimal, you have to divide by 100. And so we have to use the decimal value. And T is time, the money is invested or borrowed. And this has to always be in years. So whatever you're given, whether you're given weeks or months or days, you have to convert it to years. Example 1, calculating some simple interest and the principal. Question A, a principal of $3,500 was invested for 9 months at 3.24% annual interest to calculate the simple interest earned on this investment. So question A, we're going to start with our simple interest formula, I is equal to PRT. Now, with the simple interest formula, it may not be well, I know it's not as complicated as the compound interest formula, but in order to determine what you're calculating, because you could actually end up calculating interest, principal, rate, or time, depending on what you're given in the question. So you might want to, and I know it's helpful for some students, is to just list out what you have and what you're looking for. You have interest, principal, rate, and time. What are we given in question A? We're told a principal of $3,500. We're told an interest rate of 3.24%. And knowing that we have to convert that to a decimal, I'm going to divide by 100 right away. 3.24 divided by 100 is equal to 0.0324. And our time, 9 months. So we have 9 months. And because there are 12 months in a year, to convert this to years, I divide by 12 months. That gives me 9 over 12, which reduces to 3 over 4, which is 0.75 of a year. And then clearly the question actually says, calculate the simple interest. This is what I'm looking for. So I can simply substitute that information into my formula. I is equal to my principal, $3,500, times my interest rate as a decimal, which is 0.0324, times my time in years, 0.75. Punch that into your handy dandy calculator, you get a value of $85.05. Imperative that we are always rounding to 2 decimal points. We're talking about money. Money, we go to the nearest penny. Simple interest. Question B, a principal was invested, so we don't know the principal, was invested for 1.5 years at 3.59% annual interest and earned 81.85 simple interest. So we know we have the interest. We know we have the time, we know we have the percentage, we're looking for the principal. So there's 2 ways to approach this. I can do exactly what I just did in this question above, I can go I is equal to PRT. I know my interest was equal to 81.85. I know my principal was what we were looking for. My interest rate was 3.59%, which as a decimal, 0.0359. And my time was 1.5 years. Put that into your formula. I'm going to do that below. 81.85 is equal to my principal, which I don't know, my rate 0.0359, and my time 1.5. And then do whatever calculations necessary to isolate P. So you're going to need to divide by 0.0359 and then divide by 1.5. Or you could multiply this out and divide by one thing. Totally up to you, your choice. Either way, if I divide by 0.0359 and then divide by 1.5, I get my principal is equal to 81.85 divided by 0.0359 times 1.5. Punch that into your handy dandy calculator and you get 1519.96. Bit of a weird starting value, but that's the answer. Or what you could have done initially too is taken that formula, knowing that you're solving for principal, rearrange that formula for principal. I is equal to PRT, PRT. I want P by itself, so I'm going to divide by R. Divide by R, I get I divided by R is equal to P times T. And then I divide by T and divide by T. So I get I over RT is equal to my principal. So my principal is equal to my interest divided by my rate and time. My principal is equal to my interest divided by my rate times time. So exactly where we ended up. And like I had mentioned before, you could eventually solve, or you may have to solve for any of those four things: interest, principal, rate, or time. And I believe our next examples look at a couple of others. So let's look at example 2. A principal of $1,500 was borrowed for 8 months. So there's our principal, there's our time. The simple interest was paid here, $64.13. What was the interest rate? So now we're looking for interest rate. So if I take my formula, I is equal to PRT, and I rearrange this formula for my rate. I'm going to divide by P, divide by T, divide by P, divide by T. I get my interest rate being equal to my interest divided by my principal times my time. I know my interest from the question was $64.13. I know that my principal was $1,500. And I know that my time, my time was 8 months. Dividing that by 12 to get my years, 8 over 12. Punch that into your handy dandy calculator. You get 0.0641. Remember, that's the decimal. To get the percentage, I multiply that by 100, 6.41%. So we've calculated our interest. We've calculated what our principal was. We've calculated what our interest rate was. So this question B probably is going to calculate, well, how long was it invested for? Question B, a term deposit of $500. There's my principal, was invested at 2.65%. There's my interest rate, earned 46.38 interest. How long was our money invested? Again, start with our formula. I is equal to PRT. I want T by itself, so I'm going to divide by P and R, divide by PR. So I get my time is equal to interest divided by principal times my rate. My principal was, from this question, $500 divided by my, my interest, not principal. my interest. 60, what was it? 40, forgot, 46.38. 46.38 divided by my principal, which was $500, times my rate, which was 2.65% as a decimal, 0.0265. Calculate that out, 3.5 years, or you could say 3 years, 6 months. Half a year is 6 months. If you ever have to convert this decimal portion to years, you take your decimal portion, 0.5, and you multiply by the number of months in a year. So if this was 3.2, I would take the 0.2, the 0.2 part, I would take the 0.2 part and multiply by 12 months. 0.2, 12 times 0.2, 0.2, what is that, 2.4? 2.4 months. That I did in my head, so I hope that's right. Okay, so that's how you would convert a decimal portion to get years and months. 3.5 worked out nicely, so it was pretty easy to figure out. Moving on. Amount of investment or loan. So the simple interest formula only calculates the amount of interest that we earn or have to pay back. In order to figure out the total amount that has to be paid back or the total amount that we end up having, we have to add it back to the principal. So a simple way to think about that is the amount at the end is equal to the principal plus the interest, whether it's an investment or a loan. A couple of other formulas that sometimes you get used are very simple, or not simple, but are just manipulations of this. I know that the interest is equal to PRT, so I could rewrite that formula as P plus PRT. And then from our factoring knowledge, I see I can factor out a P, so I can factor out a P and I can get this formula too. So two other formulas that can be used, not necessarily have to be used, but can be used in these types of questions. Question A, a principal of $1,275 is invested and the interest earned is $38. What's the amount of the investment? The amount is equal to my principal plus my interest, which is equal to $1,275 plus 38, which is equal to 1313. Oops, not 1113, 1313. Question B, the amount, that's A. B, the amount of an investment is $1,500 and the principal is $1,150. What's the interest earned? So my amount is equal to my principal plus my interest. My amount was $1,500 is equal to my principal, which was $1,150, plus my interest. Well, how do you calculate the interest then? I'm going to subtract $1,150. Both sides cancels. That tells me my interest, and this works out to $350. So some of it's kind of a logical step. Sometimes it might not be as logical, but you can use those other formulas to figure it out. Calculating the amount in principal. So question A, the principal, Question A, a principal of $1,000 was invested for 7 months at 3.25% interest. What's the amount invested after the 7 months? So the amount invested after the 7 months. So you could calculate the simple interest and add it back to the principal, or you could use maybe one of these formulas that allows you to do it all in one step. Your choice, your choice. I like to keep it simple. So I'm just going to calculate my interest. Y is equal to PRT. I have a formula. I always write down the formula. My principal is $1,000 plus my interest rate as a decimal, 0.0325. And my time is 7 over 12 months. Calculate that out. I believe you get 1896. And then my amount is going to be my principal plus my interest, which is equal to 1,000 plus 1896, which gives me $1,000 $18.96. One line in dollars. Big argument one year with some students. One line in dollars. Question B, what principal must be invested now at 1.25% annual simple interest to have an amount of $174 in 2 years? $174. What principal must be invested? So you could calculate the principal and then work your way backwards. Or maybe you might want to use one of these other formulas. Well, what do we know? We know the amount, we know the interest rate, and we know the time. We're looking for the principal. If I know the amount, the interest rate, and the time, we're looking for the principal. I should be able to use this formula. A is equal to P plus, over here, B, A is equal to P bracket 1 plus RT. My amount was $174. My principal, I don't know what I'm looking for. 1 plus my interest rate was 1.25%, but it's 0.0125 as a decimal, times my time, which was 2 years. If I calculate out this bracket here, I'm going to get 174 is equal to the principal times 1.025. And then to get P by itself, I'm going to divide by 1.025. Divide by 1.025. My principal works out to be 169.76. Okay, I believe that takes us to the end. So not super rushed, but it probably went a little faster than normal. Got to get this stuff done. So I will post some questions on the board in class, and we will see you next time.